Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to a very special episode of Democracy Exchange at the DePo. Today, we are lucky enough to have two former governors of Ohio. We have Governor Celeste and then Governor Taft. And today, they're going to be answering questions for me about their careers, what it was like to be governors of Ohio, what it was like working in the political field, and kind of what they feel about the politics of today. And I'll start with an easy question. What was the road like for you to become governors of Ohio, or how did you guys get involved in your political careers?
Well, I really worked my way up. My first job was a Peace Corps volunteer, school teacher in East Africa, and then I went to the Foreign Aid Program in Vietnam during the war. Spent 3 years in the state of Illinois, where I became inspired by a very effective governor of Illinois. Came back to my hometown of Cincinnati and started to get involved in politics as a state legislator, then a county commissioner. Then I ran statewide to be Ohio Secretary of State, Chief Elections Officer of Ohio, and then did that for 8 years, and then ran for governor in 1998 and served for 2 terms as governor. So it was, for me, it was more of a step-by-step progress towards being governor. When I was in Illinois, I got inspired by that governor. That became a hope, a goal of mine at that point, but I enjoyed every position along the way.
Well, I worked for a governor when I was 25 years old. A man named Chester Bowles asked me to go to India as his personal assistant, and he had been the governor of Connecticut. He had great stories about his time as governor, and I think it probably seeded my appetite for state politics as a result. And I came back from India in 1968. In 1970, I ran for state legislature, served 2 terms in the legislature. I realized that I really didn't like commuting from Cleveland to Columbus, so I decided to run statewide. I ran for lieutenant governor in 1974. At that time, the governor and lieutenant governor ran separately, and there was a incumbent Democratic governor named Jack Gilligan, and a Republican lieutenant governor, John Brown. So I ran against John Brown for the lieutenant governor's race. I thought Jack Gilligan would get reelected, but he did not. In 1974, he lost that election by 13,000 votes out of over 3 million votes, and I won as lieutenant governor. So I went to see Jim Rhodes, who'd gotten elected governor. I said, Governor, it looked like probably as surprised as I was by the results. And he said, yes. I said, well, people of Ohio elected you and the people of Ohio elected me. How can I help? He said, do you play golf? And I said, no, I don't. Why? He said, because I'm not going to give you a damn thing to do. So I spent 4 years running for governor out of the lieutenant governor's office, and lost to him when he ran for re-election. I lost in 1978 by probably 22,000 votes out of 3 million or so. And I spent 2 years commuting to Washington as Peace Corps director, kind of the inverse of Bob's experience, and came back in 1982 and ran and won and was re-elected in 1986. I loved every day of being governor.
And what did you guys, when you became governors, what was one of your goals? Like, what did you guys hope to accomplish as governors?
Well, I became governor in 1982 in the depths of a recession. We had unemployment in Ohio was 14%. We had a huge budget deficit. So I did something very unpopular, raised taxes. But my whole goal was to figure out ways to get Ohio working again, and we made progress on that. We had a shock in 1985 because major savings and loan, privately insured savings and loan in Cincinnati failed, and it threatened to take down a number of other state-regulated, privately insured savings and loans. And so we had a major crisis called the home state crisis. And that was a very, very serious financial challenge for Ohio. my best friend had a $500 bet with the publisher of the Columbus Gazette that he bet that I would win. The publisher bet that I would lose re-election in 1986, but we successfully solved that crisis, and I won a second term. And when I left office in 1990, our unemployment rate was about just under 5%, so we had put a lot of Ohioans back to work.
In my case, the major challenge I faced right away was education, because the Ohio Supreme Court had declared Ohio's school funding system unconstitutional, in that the poorest school districts were not getting enough resources to provide a good education. So we had to address that from the get-go. We developed a very large, ambitious school rebuilding program, rebuilt schools all over the state of Ohio, but also worked hard on the quality of education and bringing in educational standards, high standards as to what students should be able to know and learn in each grade, and helped try to improve the quality of reading instruction. We had an Ohio Reads program, bringing volunteer tutors into the schools to really try to impact not just the quality, but also school buildings. And then the other challenge was making Ohio more competitive from the standpoint of economic development and jobs and opportunities for Ohioans, because we're competing with other states, with other countries. And so we had to reform our tax system to make that more competitive for business investment in the state. And of course, education is a big part of that, and investing in our colleges and universities so that we have the workforce that's ready, and career tech schools as well. So we have the workforce that's ready for those jobs once they come.
And what would you guys say was probably the most rewarding part of your job as governor? Like, what did you like most to do? What was your favorite thing to do, I guess?
I mean, you could make things happen on a large scale and also on a small scale. So, for example, on a large scale, I spent probably most of 8 years invested in trying to reform our mental health delivery system and move it out of big state institutions back into community-based delivery of services. That was a big initiative, and it took quite a while. On a more specific and smaller scale, I was approached by a group of faculty sociology professors at Ohio State who'd studied the experiences of women in the women's reformatory in Marysville. And they had concluded that probably 3/4 of those women had suffered abuse during their youth that had a bearing on their criminal conduct. And as a result of their recommendations, I set in process a motion that a process that would look at the sentences of 109 women who were in prison for having killed someone who had abused them. And in the end, I read probably 50 folders of these women. I commuted the sentences of 29 women from anywhere from 20 years to life in prison to 3 years or time served, along with community service. And that was a major change, because Ohio had not given women a chance to use the battered women syndrome as a defense in their trials. While I was in this process, the legislature changed Ohio's law to be able to do that. The interesting thing is that of those 29 women, 20 years later, only one of them had gone back to prison, which is very unusual. Recidivism is typically pretty high. And she had gone back to prison not for an assault, but because of a drug charge. So
It was very satisfying to go out to a small community in southeastern part of Ohio, the Appalachian part of Ohio, and cut the ribbon for a new school building for a district that didn't have good school buildings before I became governor. That was very satisfying. Another interesting accomplishment, so to speak, that took 4 years was to negotiate a treaty with all the other Great Lakes states and Ontario and Quebec to protect the waters of the Great Lakes, which is 20% of the surface water on the planet, from being diverted to other parts of the world. There was a plan to send Great Lakes water over to Saudi Arabia. And so we negotiated for 4 years. I had a great team working with me to do that, but we were able to reach an agreement with the other states on a legal framework where we could safeguard the waters of the Great Lakes from being diverted, and also promote water conservation within our own states. And that was approved by all the states. It became an interstate compact as well, approved by the U.S. Congress. So that was a big step towards protecting one of Ohio's most valuable resources, particularly here in the northern part of the state.
And what would you guys, we've talked about the great parts of your job, what would you say was probably the most difficult thing to do, or the most difficult part of your job as governors?
Well, first of all, governor is on duty 24/7, so you're responding to crises that occur, floods or tornadoes where people lose their houses or their possessions, and trying to do everything the state can to help a community rebuild and to help people put their lives back together and to recover. That was challenging too. And then we had wars when I was governor, not Ohio, but not Ohio against Michigan, but the United States in Iraq and other parts of the world. And so our National Guard was nationalized for that purpose. And so National Guards, men and women from Ohio, had to go overseas, and we lost some of our people. And each Memorial Day, we would have a ceremony to honor those families and those brave soldiers who lost their lives for our country. And, you know, that was important. It meant a lot to those families, but it was a very challenging task for me as governor to do that.
Well, I mean, the description is pretty much the same. I mean, the concern is that at any moment there can be a tornado that hits southeastern Ohio. There can be a concern where one of the prisons is on lockdown. The governor has a broad range of responsibility. So I think being prepared for the unexpected, I think, was the biggest challenge. Anytime a tragedy occurs, of course, you feel the weight of the tragedy because, in a sense, you understand that you're there on behalf of all the citizens of Ohio. One of the most challenging days for me was when in 1990, I went back to Kent State University on the 4th of May, the first governor to return on an anniversary of the shootings that had killed 4 students at Kent State. And I brought together the families of the students who were killed and the students who'd been injured to apologize on behalf of the state of Ohio, something that hadn't happened in the 20 years. And that was a challenging moment. I mean, it was a very emotional moment because I felt that I was speaking on behalf of all of Ohio's citizens to say this is something that we were regretted that it ever had happened.
And what was your guys' experience like working with the legislative bodies or the courts or just other factions of the government, local and or state and federal?
Well, I'm sure Bob was like me. You get sued a lot when you're the governor, but you count on the attorney general. You count on the attorney general to handle the lawsuits. Legislature's another matter. You have to deal with them every day, right? And the best days were the days the legislature wasn't in session, I would say that. But I found that I enjoyed working with the legislature more when I was governor than when I'd actually been a member of the legislature. I knew people well, and I enjoyed thinking about why would this legislator from Lebanon, Ohio, who was a Republican, support something that I was interested in, and could we sit down and talk about it? And I found the interaction with legislators in the effort to put them together behind a policy, to be one of the things that I enjoyed a great deal. I mean, it wasn't always easy, and I didn't always get my way, but it was a healthy process at that time. I'm not sure it's a healthy process today.
But we'll get to that. Don't worry.
I mentioned, excuse me, the school funding lawsuit, so we had to respond to that and try to satisfy the court from that standpoint. And any proposal you have, if it might get passed as a law, but the Supreme Court could overturn that. So you've got to be concerned about making sure your law can withstand scrutiny. And also, I was concerned also as governor that we have very experienced, knowledgeable jurists on the Ohio Supreme Court that would, from my standpoint, interpret the law as opposed to trying to make their own law substitute for, say, a legislature. From the standpoint of legislators, I was fortunate. I had a Republican, I'm a Republican, I had a Republican Senate, Republican House. Most of the time when I was governor, we worked closely together. While the legislature was in session, especially a budget year, we might meet every week, and we would try to, sort out our disagreements there as much as possible to come out with a unified program with regard to what are the priority bills. And so that worked pretty well. But at times, I was a legislator too, like Governor Celeste, so I knew that ultimately they have the power with regard to spending power. I can't spend a dime as governor without legislative approval. So I had to cultivate and court them, invite them out to the governor's residence, go to their offices even sometimes, invite them into the governor's office, do a lot of, persuasion and encouragement. And sometimes we had to make compromises on legislation to get their votes to pass something. I had a tax reform bill, increased cigarette taxes. We had a legislator out of Cincinnati who was a big smoker, and he wouldn't vote for that bill until we changed the law so he could go into Kentucky and bring back more cigarettes into Ohio. And it was not a good idea, but the only way to get his vote was to do that, and it was a bigger cause of improving Ohio's tax climate to attract more companies and jobs to Ohio. So we made a compromise in that case. But you have to work with the legislature and you have to respect them and understand their role and also get to know them and cultivate them.
Was that Boehner?
Bill Seitz.
Oh, Bill Seitz.
And kind of on this note of legislation and kind of working together, how have you guys seen that change from the time that you were governors and to now, all the way till now?
Well, I mean, I think, what we've seen is a kind of partisanship that is much sharper edged than when I was certainly involved. And I think part of this a substantial part of it has to do with gerrymandering. When districts become very safe districts, the inclination is to choose somebody who's on the more extreme of the party, whichever party controls that district. And so the distance between the legislators grows further and further apart. And, I think, if I had my way, I would want to see every legislative district in the state be very competitive, because then I think we would get higher quality representatives, and we get representatives who would be more inclined to work with each other to get things done, rather than, if the legislature gets nothing done, if you're sitting in a safe district, what difference does it make, right? You're back in a safe district. So I think it's changed, and from my view, not necessarily for the best.
Particularly at the national level, politics have become much more partisan and divisive, and sometimes even nasty. And unfortunately, some of that has filtered back to the state level. I think the state is still more functional, a little more bipartisan than at the national level. But the country is divided right now. The Congress is very divided. The presidency switches back and forth, and so it's more difficult to preserve a healthy atmosphere for working together and collaborating across party lines, even at the state level now. I think it's not as bad. The bigger problems are at the national level. I think partly related to the fact of what Governor Celeste said, which is, not enough truly competitive congressional districts. And more than that, social media and even the national press and media, it's more partisan, it's more divided now, and so we have to all work much harder to cross those boundaries, to enter into dialogue with people who may not agree with us. We have to learn that at the university, and we have to carry that into our politics, local level, state level, and then hopefully filtering up to the national level.
Segueing, that was a good segue into my next question, our last question for today. What advice do you guys have for the younger generations, the future generations who want to go into public service or want to go into government? What advice do you have for them to, I guess, have success?
Well, I would say a couple things. Number one, get informed. Number two, get involved. You've got to have good information if you're going to be able to participate and make decisions. So you need to know what's going on. And then just engage in universities, organizations, college Democrats, college Republicans, student government, whatever it may be. There's so many groups and organizations here at Bowling Green State University in which students can really learn how to work with other people, accomplish important goals working together. And then once out into the community, hopefully that will continue. Be involved in your community with nonprofits, with Rotary clubs, with chambers of commerce. Get involved, make those connections, and get to know your own community, and then, hold your elected officials accountable as an effective citizen.
Yeah, I think it begins by getting engaged, and to me, there's no age requirement. You can start as young as you want. When I campaigned for state representative, all of my volunteers were in junior high school. They were, most of them from the same Catholic girls' school, right? And we knocked on doors every weekend together. And I said to them, look, you when I get elected, you have a claim on me. And if you have a concern, let me know. Not long after I was elected, I got a call from one of the students. Her name was Peggy O'Reilly. She said, I want to talk to you about Apple Creek. I said, Apple Creek? And she said, it's a state institution, and it's doing a terrible job. And turns out that she and her classmates had seen a documentary that was done on the conditions in this state hospital for people who were mentally retarded. And the conditions were terrible. This is in 1970, or 71, 70, I guess the film was taken. And so I met with them, and we went down and talked to the superintendent at Apple Creek, and the superintendent said, the reason why these conditions exist is because we don't have the money for staff. We have a staff for one 8-hour session, from 8 in the morning till 4 in the afternoon. When that staff leaves, they had patients who there were columns in these large halls, and they would bind the patient to the column with their hands tied behind them, because otherwise they might harm themselves overnight. It was terrible conditions. And I said, the answer was we need the resources in the state budget to support these hospitals. And Jack Gilligan at that time was the governor, fighting for an appropriation for an income tax to pay for that, among other things, for 24-hour staffing at the state mental institutions and institutions for retarded families or individuals. And so the legislature passed that initiative, and it was put on the ballot by referendum. So the question was, do we keep the state income tax or do we reject it? And I went back to Peggy O'Reilly and these kids who'd worked on my campaigns. I said, we have to defend this. It was the same time I was running for re-election 2 years later. And they worked on that campaign. But I think when you get involved, when you have an interest and you get involved, you get ownership of the system. You are invested in it. And You hold your candidate accountable. You hold your elected official accountable. And you can do that on a school board race. You can do it in a volunteer position on any campaign. But I think if you want to get involved, you do need to be informed. The more you study, whether it's history or political science or whatever it is, the better. But the key is, get out and do it. Roll up your sleeves and do it.
Governor Celeste, Governor Taft, thank you so much for joining me here today. And I'm your host, Samantha Conrad. Thank you for all our viewers and listeners for tuning in to Democracy Exchange with the DePo. Thank you, as always, to our Falcon Media team and to our founder, Dr. Alexander. And thank you to our podcast team, Samantha Perry and Maria Thierry. And I've been your host, Samantha Conrad. Join us next time at Democracy Exchange with the DePo.
To find the video version of this podcast, you can find us on our YouTube page at BGSU DePo. Bye for now.